Welcome back to Chat Like a Native, everyone. Today, we're diving into something that can sometimes trip up even pretty confident English speakers. You know
Mhm.
those awkward silences in
Wow.
conversations?
Yeah, we've all definitely been there.
Right, that moment where the conversation just sort of fizzles out.
Yeah,
But what if you had some, easy strategies to keep things flowing naturally so you feel, more confident, more connected when you're speaking English?
exactly. And that's what today's deep dive is all about.
We're going to explore exactly that today.
Yeah, those pauses, they don't actually have to be scary. Think of
Yeah.
them more as little opportunities, really.
Opportunities. Okay, I like that.
And we're going to give you some really practical ways to not just fill those gaps, but maybe even use them to build, stronger, more interesting conversations.
Okay, great. So let's get into the first approach.
Mm.
This one's all about asking follow-up questions. Now, it might sound simple on the surface,
Mm-hmm.
but there's definitely a bit of an art to it, isn't there?
Absolutely. It's not just firing off any old question. It's really about showing you're genuinely curious. Like you want to dig a little deeper into what the other person has just shared.
Right. And when you do that, it sends a clear signal like, hey, I'm actually interested in you and what you're saying.
Precisely.
And the cool thing is, it kind of buys you a little time too, doesn't it? While they're answering your follow-up, you actually get a second to think, okay, where can we go next?
Totally. It takes some of that pressure off. You don't have to feel like you're constantly inventing new topics out of thin air.
Yeah, okay. So how do we actually, do this effectively?
Well, the trick is to really listen.
Yeah.
Listen for those little details, those interesting bits in what they say.
Okay, so if someone says, "Oh, I just got back from a trip."
Yeah, exactly. Instead of just the standard, oh, that's nice, which is, let's be honest, a bit of a conversation stopper.
Right, a dead end.
You pick out a specific part, the fact they went on a trip, that's your hook.
Got it. So you could start with something like, "Oh, a trip. That sounds amazing." That's a decent start, maybe.
It's a good opener, yeah. But the real power is in the follow-up, so you need to ask something specific about that trip.
Okay, so instead of just leaving it there, I could ask, "Oh, where did you end up going?" Or maybe, "What was the best part of your trip?"
Mhm.
Something like that.
Yes, exactly those kinds of questions. They really invite the person to tell you more, to share their actual experience.
So let's try another one. Say someone mentions, "I've started painting classes."
Okay,
Instead of just, "Oh, cool."
right.
Maybe something like painting classes. Wow, that sounds fun. What style are you learning? Is it like watercolor or oils?
Perfect. And then they say, maybe watercolor. And you don't stop there, right?
Uh-huh. Then maybe. Nice. What's been the hardest part about watercolor so far?
See, that keeps it going. It shows you're genuinely curious about their experience with painting. It just opens things right up.
It really does. It
Yeah.
feels much more engaging. Now, hang on. There's a slight cultural thing to maybe keep in mind here.
Oh, good point. Yes.
Like in some cultures, maybe parts of Northern Europe, for instance, asking too many really personal questions right off the bat might feel a little intense or intrusive.
That's a really insightful observation. Yeah, you absolutely need to be sensitive to that. Pay attention to how comfortable the other person seems. Some cultures definitely value privacy more, especially early on.
So if you sense they're kind of pulling back a bit, maybe giving shorter answers.
Exactly. That's your cue to maybe shift gears, steer the conversation towards something a bit more neutral for a while. Hobbies, movies, general stuff.
Makes sense. It's
Yeah.
all about reading the room, basically,
Yay.
being observant. Okay, so that's follow-up questions. Strategy number 2 is about sharing personal reactions, adding a bit of yourself in.
Yes. This is about moving beyond just like nodding and saying, okay. It's offering a little glimpse of your own thoughts, feelings, maybe even a quick related experience.
So not just a generic response, but something a bit more personal.
Exactly. A quick comment, an opinion, a feeling, or like I said, a really short anecdote that connects to what they said.
And why does that work so well? How does it keep the conversation from stalling?
Well, it really helps build connection, doesn't it? Rapport. When you share a little something about yourself, it often encourages the other person to do the same. It creates this feeling of, shared ground.
Oh, okay. Like mutual sharing.
Yeah. Plus, your own enthusiasm or empathy, that can really boost the energy of the whole interaction.
So how do we actually do this? How can we weave these reactions in naturally?
Well, one really straightforward way is using I statements.
I statements.
Yeah. So if someone tells you about, say, a challenge they overcame, instead of just, that's good, you could try, wow, I think that's really impressive. Or maybe, I imagine that must have taken a lot of resilience. See, I think or I imagine makes it personal.
That does feel warmer, more genuine.
It really does. Another thing you can do is share a tiny related mini story. Super brief, though.
Okay, like what?
So if someone says they're learning guitar,
Hmm.
you could say something like, oh, that's awesome. I tried guitar back in college. Gosh, my fingers were so sore at first, but I actually loved figuring out the chords. It's quick, it relates, and it shares a little piece of you.
Right, right. Okay, here's another scenario. Someone says, I'm learning to play guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just, cool, I could say, oh, that's fantastic. I actually tried learning guitar myself a few years back. My fingers just weren't having it, but I have so much respect for anyone who sticks with it.
Exactly. See how much more engaging that is. It shows you can relate on some level, and it invites them to share more about their own guitar journey. Like maybe they found it easy, maybe they struggled too.
Yeah, it opens the door. And you mentioned nonverbals too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Don't forget those. A genuine smile, maybe nodding along as you share your reaction, that really reinforces the warmth and keeps things positive.
Definitely. Okay, let's move to strategy number 3. This one is about using transition phrases, which sounds like helping the conversation flow smoother, especially if you want to change the topic slightly.
Spot on. That's exactly what they do. Think of them as like little verbal bridges or signposts.
Okay.
Yeah, they signal to the other person, okay, we're about to shift gears a little, or I'm going to connect this to something we talked about earlier. It just helps avoid those really abrupt topic changes that can feel awkward and, well, lead to silence.
Okay, so what are some common ones we can use?
Well, there are quite a few useful ones. You could use speaking of to link back to something that was just mentioned.
Right.
So if you were talking about travel and someone mentions Italy, you could say, oh, speaking of Italy, have you seen that new travel show about Tuscany?
Ah, okay. That's smooth. What about if you want to bring up something kind of new, but you don't want it to feel totally random?
That's where, by the way, is really useful. It's super casual.
Okay.
So maybe you're talking about work, and then you could say, oh, by the way, did you happen to catch that game last night? It just slips a new topic in gently.
I like that one. And you also mentioned, that reminds me of, sounds like it's good for stories.
Exactly. It's perfect for connecting an anecdote. If someone's telling a funny story about, say, a mix-up at the supermarket, you could jump in with, oh, that reminds me of this one time when it builds a bridge between their story and yours.
So why are these little phrases so, effective at keeping things going?
They just really smooth out the edges, They make the whole conversation feel more joined up, less like a random list of topics. They give the listener a little heads up that a shift is happening so it doesn't feel jarring or clunky.
Right. Avoids that, wait, how did we get here feeling?
Precisely.
So how can we start practicing using these more?
Well, again, it starts with listening. Listen for those key words or themes. They can be your trigger to use a transition phrase. Think, okay, they mentioned restaurants. How can I link that? Maybe use speaking of restaurants, or that reminds me of this great place.
Okay.
And sometimes, offering a tiny link helps. Like, speaking of busy schedules, that reminds me I wanted to ask you about.
Gotcha. So let's say someone's talking about, gardening. How could I transition smoothly to maybe talk about farmers markets?
Oh, easy. You could say something like, oh, speaking of fresh produce from the garden, have you been to the farmer's market downtown recently? See? It uses speaking of to link the garden produce to the market produce. Natural.
That really does make sense. And like you mentioned with questions, there's probably a formality thing here too.
Absolutely. Good point. Yeah, in a more formal situation, like maybe a work meeting or something, you'd probably lean towards slightly more formal transitions. Things like moving on to another point, or perhaps on a related note, you just choose the phrase that fits the vibe, fits the context, and your relationship with the person.
Right. I always got to read the room. Okay, great. So our fourth and final strategy today for dodging those conversational voids. It's all about showing you're actually listening.
Yeah.
And that's more than just not talking, right?
So much more, yeah. Active listening, it's really about showing the other person you're fully tuned in, that you're processing what they're actually saying. It involves both verbal cues and your body language.
Okay, so what are some key ways we can signal, hey, I'm with you?
Well, you can start with those small verbal nods, minimal responses.
Wow.
It's like, right, okay, I see. Or maybe, that makes sense. These little sounds just confirm you're tracking the conversation.
But you don't want to overdo it, right? Just saying, constantly might sound a bit robotic.
Exactly. Mix it up. The variety is key. You don't want to sound like you're just on autopilot.
Okay. What else besides those little sounds?
Paraphrasing is super powerful.
Paraphrasing, so like repeating what they said.
Not exactly repeating, but restating the core of what you heard in your own words. You could start with something like, okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that. Or, so what you mean is.
Okay. And that does what?
It does two things, really. One, it confirms you actually understood them correctly. Two, it shows you were paying close enough attention to be able to rephrase it.
Makes sense. And then there's the nonverbal side you mentioned. Body language.
Huge.
Yeah.
Simple things like nodding occasionally, not constantly, but nodding to show agreement or understanding. Maintaining comfortable eye contact, not staring intensely, but showing you're connected. And maybe leaning in just slightly can signal you're really engaged.
So why is all this active listening stuff so crucial for keeping a conversation flowing?
Because fundamentally, it makes the other person feel heard. And when someone feels genuinely heard and understood, they're much more likely to open up, to share more, to continue the conversation. It creates this positive cycle, you know? Plus, by doing things like paraphrasing and asking clarifying questions, you catch misunderstandings early before they can kind of derail things.
Right, prevents confusion. Okay, any other little tips for showing we're tuned in?
While sometimes subtly mirroring the other person's posture, if it feels natural, don't force it, can build rapport.
Okay.
And definitely asking clarifying questions. If something isn't quite clear, saying something like, sorry, when you mentioned specific point, could you tell me a bit more about what you meant? That shows you're really trying to grasp their perspective, not just waiting for your turn to talk.
Okay, let's do an example. Say someone shares, I'm feeling really stressed about this presentation I have to give at work. How could I respond using active listening?
Good one. Okay, you could say something like, oh, wow, stressed about the presentation. That sounds really tough. First, acknowledge the feeling.
Right, acknowledge it.
Then maybe follow up with, is there anything in particular about it that's making you feel anxious? You've shown you heard the core issues, stress about the presentation, and you've asked an open-ended question, inviting them to elaborate.
Yeah, that feels really supportive. It definitely encourages them to say more than just, yeah, it's stressful.
Exactly. It opens the door.
Okay, fantastic. So just to quickly recap these 4 strategies,
Yeah.
we've talked about asking those thoughtful follow-up questions,
Digging deeper.
sharing relevant personal reactions to build connection,
Adding that personal touch.
using those handy transition phrases like speaking of or by the way to smooth things over.
Keeping the flow.
And finally, really showing you're engaged through active listening, verbal cues, body language, paraphrasing.
Yeah, demonstrating you're truly present.
And these are all really practical tools, things people can start trying out like tomorrow in their English conversations.
Absolutely. And maybe we can touch on a couple of common worries people might still have.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Like what if your mind goes totally blank? You genuinely can't think of a single thing to say.
The dreaded blank.
Yeah.
It happens, right? Even to native speakers.
Totally.
The tip here is maybe have a few go-to topics sort of prepared in the back of your mind, things you generally feel comfortable talking about, your hobbies, maybe a recent movie you saw or book you read, travel dreams, stuff like that.
Yeah. Having a few safety nets.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about silence itself? Is a pause always like a failure? Does it always mean the conversation is dying?
Not at all. That's a really important point. Sometimes a brief pause is just thinking time. Someone might be formulating their next thought. Don't panic and feel you have to rush in and fill every single gap.
Right. It's okay to just breathe for a second.
Exactly. Use that moment to maybe reflect on what was just said or think about where you want to go next. A little silence isn't necessarily awkward.
Good reminder. Okay, and one last quick tip.
Yeah.
How do we end a conversation politely when it actually is time to go without just, abruptly stopping?
Yeah, you need a smooth exit too. Using some standard closing phrases works well. Things like, well, it was really great talking to you, or I've really enjoyed our chat, but I should probably get going. Maybe add something like, let's definitely catch up again soon. It just signals the end politely and positively.
Perfect. So for everyone listening, our challenge to you is this. Pick just 1, maybe 2 of these strategies
Just start small.
and consciously try to weave it into your next conversation in English. Just notice what happens. See how it feels, how it changes the interaction.
You might be genuinely surprised at how much smoother and, well, more engaging things feel.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Think back to a time when an English conversation felt a bit sticky, a bit awkward because of silence.
Yeah, we've all had those.
How might applying just one of these techniques, a follow-up question, a personal reaction, a transition, some active listening, how might that have changed that specific moment? Something to ponder.
Definitely. Which strategy are you most curious to try first?
We really hope this deep dive has armed you with some practical, effective ways to chat like a native, feeling more confident and less worried about those silences.